Okay, so moral hazard. Give this a read. You heard of this one? I remember seeing it in a magazine. You heard of it, Jesse, or did you see it somewhere? Yeah. Has anybody used it or knew of somebody who used it? You did?
No.
Oh, okay. So, do people think about the probabilities of accidents when they're driving?
Rarely, probably.
Yeah, rarely, but you probably do, maybe indirectly more than you think. You know, we've started to get in the habit of pulling our seatbelts over and just kind of do it out of habit now, but reduces your chance of harm, right? So we're thinking a little bit. It's a law, but I don't do it that reason. But yeah, some people do it for the law. No, you're right.
That's the reason my wife is as well.
Good point. Good point.
I've had friends get tickets.
Yeah, yeah. And you're right, I do too. I take that back. I mean, yeah, I don't want to get a ticket, so it's maybe the probability of getting a ticket in addition to the safety concerns. Yeah. So yeah, I'm with you on that. So yeah, when they change the law, because heaven forbid, if we hurt ourselves or something, might be in trouble. So we also have the probability of having an accident change when we buy insurance. So does the probability go up or down when we buy insurance? The probability of having an accident.
You always have to have insurance. I get your question.
You're not dictated what level of insurance, and you don't have to carry, you just have to carry liability, so you don't have to carry full coverage. So think of it that way, maybe.
Goes up.
It goes up. Why?
Because
I'd agree with you.
you realize that the cost of an accident to you is less with insurance than without it.
Yep. So our behavior again might change a bit. So I kind of think back to, I've had a couple, I don't think real close friends. Well, that's not true. I guess one was fairly close that got a DWI, and they tended to drive a little bit more carefully and cautiously after they got that first DWI. A, they learned how expensive it was. B, the second offense ramps up the penalty, right? So we kind of change our behavior based on the cost of an event happening. And so if you did break the law once, you might be tempted to not break it again if the costs are high enough. All right, so that is the idea. Oh, click, click. I even charged it that whole time. I bet it's not going to work. Ooh, wait, it's flashing. Ooh. No. No, it doesn't. No. It just, it does need to be charged, but it seems like the battery, I bet it's not synced up or something. All right. Yeah, it's not even working when it's in the cradle. I bet it's not synced up. Okay. So, costs go down and accidents go up. So, hidden actions or behavior. Now that we've whet your appetite a little bit with the concept, can you think of anything else? Moral hazard, where your actions are kind of hidden or your behavior changes after you've got something in place. I know it's kind of hard to shake the insurance thing out of your head, isn't it? But you could talk about it in the insurance realm outside of the car, too. We just went through the car example. Skylar?
Well, does any kind of have a problem with the quality of the pads football players use?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great example. I didn't remember that one from the book. So basically, as technology has helped, whether it's helmets and pads and other things, tend to not maybe exercise the same level of care you did with a lower
Yeah.
quality.
Well, back,
Or,
back when pads were, seventies, eighties, it hurt to hit people.
Mhm.
And then as pads got better, helmets got improved, people started hitting people and it didn't hurt as bad. So they started hitting them.
it didn't hurt themselves as
Right,
bad.
hurt them
Okay.
as bad. So then you start seeing the spearing shots and
Huh.
the pad helmets who throw their whole bodies in people.
Yeah, I never thought about that. I don't remember that in the book, and but yeah, that makes sense.
Which required rule changes. So
Mhm.
the NFL and college had to implement
So the
rules.
helmet to helmet stuff and was
So we-
maybe somewhat a result of that.
Pads were improved and they brought up to improve safety, but it actually created more problems.
Created more problems.
So they had to change the rules.
And probably more severe problems, perhaps. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Anything else come to mind?
Well, I would say life insurance.
Okay.
You've done your exam, you got your physical, and you're good to go, and your premium's set.
Yeah. Time to ride the bowl, jump out of the plane, do whatever. Because usually you don't have to say that you won't do those activities. Once you get it, you're golden. So the how does the life insurance company address adverse selection with that? That adverse selection is prior to engaging in a life insurance contract. What are some of the things they do to kind of try to overcome adverse selection?
Higher prices for scalpers.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, then you got your physical and your history as far as what you.
That's the one I was thinking about, yes, and they do those other things too, but have you ever jumped out of an airplane? Have you ever ridden a bull? They just ask you, and if you lie and say, nope, never jumped out of an airplane, and then it turns out you run skydiving and you went back to doing your thing and you croak, you're going to get investigated. They're going to go back to your application. Well, that's funny. Russ said he never skydived before. Is that true? And so they start asking a neighbor and a friend, oh, no, he's been out skydiving all his life. Yeah, we used to go out on weekends. It was awesome. 10,000 feet. We really did this fancy trick, whatever. So you're busted and no insurance claim likely. I mean, you will not be, your beneficiaries will not get the dough if you weren't up front. So that's, yes, you can lie on the front end, but no, you might not get paid if you're not careful, if you did some fraudulent things on your application. So, do they still give out policies to people who jump out of planes? Well, that's where you start to get, circumstantial. Well, I jumped out of a plane 10 years ago. Does that count? And you start going through that scenario. Or are you doing it every weekend? So who's the risky person? Who's not? What category can I bump them into? The insurance company is going to find a policy that they can offer to you because they go back to their statistic tables and they say, okay, this guy's a regular airplane jumper. Probability of death is X. They go through some expected value calculation. Boom, here's your policy, here's your premium. Well, why am I paying $500 when Russ is only paying $100? Well, you jump out of planes every weekend. Do you want to pay it or not? Right? So that's a risk that's still insurable. So there's still a market for risky behavior too. Okay. Any other ones come to mind?
Last in that little film we watched, he mentioned that those who have health care or health insurance, though he didn't use health insurance, are more likely to not live a healthy lifestyle. But one on the same lines, one that's interested me is if we have free health care or something close to free health care, I think there's going to be a moral hazard of people going to maybe the doctor too often.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
To preventative medicine. It's just a curiosity about it.
Yeah, no, that's correct.
Where is preventative and where is going to?
Right. It'll distort those incentives too, for sure. And I just heard on NPR this week, within the last few days or something, the thing that I think we talked about in here, it was on, I think it was in here, maybe it was on a podcast or we talked about it. you don't oh, it's one of our problems, I think, where you don't have incentive to actually get insured because it's cheaper to pay the penalty to the IRS than it is to get insurance. That's true. That was on NPR. That's exactly the point they were bringing up. So you pay 1% of your adjusted gross income or something is the penalty that you face. So if you look at 1% of $40,000, that's $400, right? Is the penalty. That's 1 month's premium of health insurance. So it's a no-brainer to not get insurance if you choose not to. Obviously, there's still the benefits of having health insurance. But the funny thing is they go back and they say, well, we got to force these young people, these young healthy people, they got to be on the plan too. It's exactly what we talked about in class. The adverse selection problems and moral hazard is how do we force the young people to support the other people, because that's the only way the premiums come down. Instead, what we do is they have on the books currently a system that makes it better for you to wait till you have an event, because they can't deny you health insurance. So that's part of the law too. So now just stay without insurance until you get sick, and then pay your $400 to the IRS because you got that penalty waiting for you. Pay a premium to the insurance because you can't be denied, and have your $150,000 surgery that you need. It's pretty messed up. And that's why it got delayed, I think, another year. That and amongst many other issues, implementing it at the employer level and other things. So there's a pretty strong movement to try to just have it abolished. Don't know where that's going to go. It's going to be, I guess, on the public and what they feel, but I think if there's people who react to that differently. They're going to say, well, no, let's force young people to be on the plan. Well, that's basically a tax, right? If you're forced to do it, then you're just paying the tax, the health insurance tax, which is kind of what's going on anyway with the fees. But the problem is their fee isn't high enough. So from the accountant standpoint, it's like, if you really want to do this, if that's what everybody thinks, and that's the way this country's headed or whatever, then make the penalty higher than the health insurance premium. Because people will make a rational economic decision and say, oh, well, I guess it's cheaper to have health insurance than to pay that penalty to the IRS. Let's do that. So, interesting stuff. All right. Let's go to the bicycle. Suppose that bike stands a 40% chance of theft on the street overnight. But if it's locked up, that probability drops to 30%. Marginal benefit, marginal cost. Person with the first correct answer gets a copy of Freakonomics. Go. So do a marginal analysis. What is the marginal benefit and the marginal cost of exercising care? And by the way, you got the $100 bike still. Same bike continuation. So the value of the bike is $100. We're not building on an insurance deal or anything. Just take this problem as it is right here. You got a $100 bike. Marginal benefit, marginal cost. As soon as you got an answer, raise your hand. I'll come check it out. And you may be the winner of a lovely book. Freakonomics. Which, by the way, is really a good book. You guys will especially like it after this class, I think. But it's not meant, you don't have to have econ training to enjoy the book either. is the marginal benefit and marginal cost of exercising care?
Can I use my phone as calculator?
Sure.
And I-
Give you a hint, you don't have to make it overly complicated. Who's ready? Probably an easy way and a harder way to do the problem. Another hint. It's okay to be wrong. We love wrong answers. We learn from wrong answers. Courage is the most important virtue in the room right now.
Okay, mine's totally wrong, but
Okay.
you can look at it,
All right, first jump.
because I have no idea what I'm doing. Because I do not remember how to calculate these.
Okay, I don't want to give you any hints,
Okay,
but you don't have it yet.
okay,
But you can keep working.
okay.
And after another minute, if nobody else has volunteered, I'm going to look at all of your papers. Take the best one, gets the book. 1 minute starting now. If you haven't answered, tell me and I'll come look at it. You'll still be in top position. Really thinking this is a poor use of our time, given the fact that there is.
That the theater major had to come up with something.
Yeah.
I could show my this is correct.
Okay. I'm not going to comment yet. I got your answer.
So we
Okay.
got-
Yeah, you do not have the right answer yet.
All right. So keep working.
Keep working. You got 40 seconds.
Do you want to look at mine?
15 seconds. Yes, I don't look at anybody's. You might just be onto something here. Okay, so label things for me a little bit. Maybe I shouldn't give you that hint, but what is the marginal benefit and marginal cost of exercising care?
This is the benefit.
Okay? No.
It's the care.
It's something. I mean, you guys are all chipping away at some of the pieces. Okay, we're done.
Okay.
So let me look at everybody's just to see.
Put that.
Oh, Skylar's on it.
This final's gonna be fun.
All right, Skylar.
Uh-oh.
I think you hit it. If you can explain it, like it was just a wild guess. So your marginal cost was
Do
correct.
a graph or something, that's awesome.
This is notes.
30%. So what is the cost of exercising care? Let's start there. Skylar, I'm going to pick on you, I guess, this time since you're
So the
looking book worthy tonight.
Shouldn't do when you hear the explanation. No. Operator's credit.
So how'd you get your 5? You had 5 down for marginal cost. Why?
Because by exercising care, the difference is $10. So you're essentially saving $10.
So what gets hard, and I saw you guys doing that, is kind of battling maybe between the cost and the benefit. So we have these things listed separately. What is the marginal benefit? What is the marginal cost? And the idea from economic decision making is if the benefits exceed the cost, do it. If the costs exceed the benefits, don't do it, right? And in reality, we can't predict the future, so we talk about the expected marginal benefit and the expected marginal cost. In this case, we've got really a known marginal cost. The bike lock costs $5. You guys could have maybe added, well, then it's kind of a pain in the butt when you go to the place where you're going, you have to actually work to lock up your bike. It's really hard to loop it around something, but there's a cost there, right? Really, there is. So there could be a little bit of cost there, but you're good with the 5. Now on the benefit side, what about this $10 you came up with?
That was because it was $40 essentially.
Okay.
Will be the chance, because it's 40% of the 100, and then it reduced it to 30.
Yep.
So I just,
So that was the easy way of figuring it. Was really just the differential between the two. Was the $10 savings at the margin? Because again, we're isolating this down to exercising care. There's still a chance of it getting stolen. So some of you were getting into your formulas, which by the way you could do and still come up with $10 by coming up with setting that up. But really you've got $40 if you don't expected marginal cost, bear in mind, right? Because there's still a chance it won't be stolen, but you've got $40 cost versus a $30 cost. And so the benefit at the margin of exercising care is $10. Expected benefits $10, expected cost is $5. Do it or not do it?
Do it.
Do it.
Because the benefit's greater than the cost.
Because the benefit's greater than the cost. Yep. So, nice job, Skylar. Nice catch. Expected as much from a star football player. Oh, the camera wouldn't have known better. They're looking at this 3-4 years down the road. You could have been a star if you would have just rolled along. All right, so that's the marginal decision with the care. All right. So, will the consumer take the extra time to lock up the bicycle once she buys insurance?
If the deductible gives incentive to do so.
Okay, so if we're doing full insurance like we did before, they wouldn't, right? If there's not some sort of deductible penalty, which was more the partial insurance example we went through last time. So if you buy insurance, there's really no benefit at all now, right? I mean, you purchased away, you're going to get your bike replaced, the full 100 if it's the full insurance example, whether you exercise care or not. But that creates a problem for State Farm, right? I mean, they'd like to see you exercising care. So from State Farm's perspective, it's not a good business practice to assume people will lock their bikes. The incentive structure is not set up to see that be the outcome of people exercising care and locking their bikes. Once they got insurance, moral hazard kicks in and, well, why should I do it? They don't have any incentive to do so. So from a pricing standpoint, they again now have to assume the worst if they want to stay in business. To avoid adverse selection and moral hazard issues, they're right back up to the 40%. All right.
just wondering,
Yeah.
I could be way off about doing something, but like Volvo is known for being really safe cars.
Yep.
So why are all the Volvo drivers tend to be more responsible type people? You'd think that they'd be more reckless if they were driving the safest car in the world.
Yeah, I don't know if would there be other attributes to a Volvo person other than that? So I guess let's get into your example a little bit more. In fact, we're gonna have a slide on it later, but since you brought it up,
Age has something to do with it.
age, okay.
Definitely.
So what's true about Volvo? So first of all, does everybody know Volvos are kind of a safe car? They're known for their safety historically. They were the ones with the old TV commercials where they drive them into a brick wall and says, look at this person walked away from it or whatever, and this thing's built like a tank. Was kind of the deal. And so you're saying the people that you know anyway, because you're not looking at real data, I'm assuming, but you've kind of got the perception that more careful, conscientious people buy the Volvo rather than risky people.
You know, we don't really hear a whole lot of people going out and buying Volvos and just
They're expensive, yeah. That's one thing I was thinking about, is that the price tag's high. They're in the kind of luxury class of vehicles.
Okay.
They've now look a little cooler than they did in the past, so they've made the design a little nicer. What's that, Ryan?
It used to be boxy.
Yeah, they were really just, they did look like a tank, like a little army vehicle of some sort. And maybe that was somewhat in style back then, but they didn't change it for a number of years. As cars started to be more sleeker, Volvo kind of kept this boxy appearance, and then they've kind of changed that. So yeah, a lot of different factors going on. But so to isolate that factor from an economics perspective, if you were looking at the data, would be to say, holding those factors constant, people's income, people, whatever, are we seeing those sorts of people select into that or not? So you kind of start to, when you're doing a real analysis, you try to control for those other factors that might be entering in. Yep. Okay, so how can the insurance company induce the bike owner to exercise care? Jesse. S.
One, deductibles.
Deductibles. So that was the answer to that. So if we have them have a little bit on the line, if their deductible, I guess in this case, is $6 or something, then that makes it advantageous for them to use their bike, or to use their bike lock, to pay for the lock and exercise care. So a deductible would be one way to do that. Anything else come to mind?
There's like, say, maybe it should be like a driver discount deals, like the cars that have the safe driver deals. I mean, it's kind of like deductible, right?
Yeah, I mean, so they could do that. So with that type of thing, how would you know they're doing it? They could give them the lock, for that matter.
Yeah.
What's that, right?
Claim free.
Claim free, right. Look at their history. Good. Yeah. And, yeah, they could give them the lock, but are they going to use it? And then the first time it helped, they cut it, throw it in the garbage. Oh, yeah, I was supposed to be locking it. But I didn't. Oh, they cut the lock and took it with them because they needed a spare cut cable, I guess. Might be difficult to do that. Maybe that's possible somehow. That's what we saw in the opening example of monitoring the behavior of the people. Right? If they agree to have a little camera, a big brother on them, showing whether they're locking their bicycle or not. I know that sounds far-fetched, but are there some cameras out there? Do you think we're being watched sometimes? Yeah, that little...
All the time.
Yeah, more and more all the time. I mean, man, that has escalated so far, so fast. I remember when the intersection cameras was kind of the big deal. And they still are. They kind of come in and out of the news sometimes. But, I mean, man, you can see the slippery slope. It's like once we start not complaining, then it's the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. And it can get kind of crazy. All right, so here we go. This is your chance. I think one of these is going to be Skylar. So drivers with airbags are more likely to get into traffic accidents. Moral hazard and adverse selection. Talk to me. Gosh, I've kind of heard from everybody. We need to go to Gustavo. You've been more quiet than usual. Drivers with airbags are more likely to get into traffic accidents. So give me an adverse selection explanation or a moral hazard. I'll let you pick. How would you explain that for the test? So it's not either or. You could, with this one, you could give an adverse selection argument or a moral hazard. I think both apply. You pick.
Make up that first section. I don't know.
Give me the story. Jesse. B.
I would take the moral hazard. I think it'd be easier to
Okay.
explain.
Go for it.
People with airbags might drive a little more recklessly because they know they're protected and they're a little.
Okay, perfect. Ryan, adverse selection argument for this. So Jesse correctly kind of showed the moral hazard issue. Adverse selection. Adverse selection tends to be a little tougher.
I say the opposite?
I don't know, give it a try and we'll see if it works.
Individuals with airbags tend to drive safer.
No, not that opposite. Skylar. Adverse selection for this.
With airbags, the pool of customers are going to be more reckless because they know they crashed more often.
Okay, there you go. So who are we attracting prior to a purchase? So after the purchase, as Jesse said, you start driving crazy, but you own the car already, right? That's moral hazard. Pre-contract, before you buy, who are we attracting to these types of cars? Oh, well, we better get the one with airbags, honey. You know how I like to drive into semis, and I am 96 now, so maybe those airbags would be a good idea, right? So that's adverse selection. The old guy buying the airbag car rather than one without. So we attract that type of person to the game. So Volvo drivers are more likely to run stop signs. Skylar.
False.
Not an answer. Let's take this as a given that that's true. They've observed this in the data that Volvo drivers are more likely to run stop signs. Moral hazard or adverse selection or
Well, I mean, it could be argued the same as the first one, right?
Yeah.
Adverse selection. They buy the Volvo expecting or knowing that they drive like that, and know that they get the maximum efficiency.
yep. So same type of thing, right? Drive a little more recklessly once we are in the tank. All you can eat restaurants. Justin, give me a moral hazard or adverse selection.
Well, you're already in there, you've already paid your $6.99 for all you can eat, so why would you not eat all you can eat?
Okay.
Get your money's worth.
So
That's a
what are
sunk
you doing?
cost.
What are you doing? Yeah, what are you doing from a behavior standpoint? Then are you talking moral hazard or adverse selection with what you were just talking there?
Moral hazard.
Moral hazard, right? I purchased my ticket. I'm in the door. The buffet is before me.
Right. I'm gonna get it while I can.
Okay, so we're gonna get it while we can and eat probably more than I would have eaten had I gone to a regular sit-down restaurant.
Right.
Right? Okay. Adverse selection.
Kind of people we're attracting.
Okay, so you're going to attract people who want to eat larger volumes of food. And so once they're in the restaurant, the marginal cost is what? Thinking back to what Jesse just said on a little bit on sunk costs here. What is your marginal cost of eating more? Monetary cost? 0. Any other sorts of cost? What's that? Possibly health, or maybe even short-term kind of how you feel. I mean, really, it's not your health, long-term health. It's long-term health if you do this every day for the next 20 years and you go to the buffet and you gorge yourself every single day. Then we're talking long-term health. But short-term health, right in the moment, whether you're healthy or whether you're not, your cost is... Let's see here. Well, this looks good. A little more of this. This tastes pretty good, right? No monetary cost, but still an opportunity cost. And you might be thinking about something you're not going to be able to do well that night, like if you're running a marathon that night. Maybe overloading at the buffet wouldn't be a good thing to do, right? So there's other things that enter the equation, but certainly monetary costs are zip. So you're just acting rational. That's why I try to avoid buffets. I mean, I like buffets just as much as anybody else, but knowing the economist in me, I sit there and do that damn equation every time I go into the buffet, right? Marginal cost, zip. Marginal benefit, I get this much more enjoyment off of the 4th scoop of those cheesy potatoes, right? I got this much enjoyment for the first scoop, this much enjoyment for the second scoop, this much enjoyment for the 3rd scoop. The 4th scoop, I got this much enjoyment, and if I want maybe even the 5th enjoyment, as long as I'm not hugging the toilet, gives me a little bit of enjoyment. And so my demand for food under those cases The marginal benefit curve looks like it always does. The marginal benefit curve is the demand curve. What is your demand for food? The problem is the marginal cost curve is right here. My optimal decision is to consume food where the marginal benefit of the last unit eaten is equal to the cost of the last unit, which means I go for 10 scoops of the cheesy potatoes, right? So it's all about economics. All of these decisions in life. You know, one of my frustrations is when people say, well, it's just the economics of it, when they really mean it's just the finance of it. You know, when we're talking numbers and crunching, they kind of say, well, it's just the economics of it. Well, they're wrong. The economics of it is taking into consideration all the non-monetary things as well, where the finance person might not take that into account, or the accounting person might not take that into account, but an economic analysis does take that into account. Did I hear somebody else?
I was just gonna say, can you shorten your marginal benefit by your state of mind? Like you can tell yourself, yeah, right there, if I just think of the present, it'll be my marginal benefit's that right there. But, you know, tomorrow I'll probably weigh an extra pound if I keep eating.
Yeah.
So, and that'll make me feel worse than I do right now.
So this,
that
that gets way deeper than what we can go into
I got
class.
it,
But
yeah.
the short story is, this reflects those preferences
Yeah, okay.
of you taking in both long-term and short-term benefits and all
Okay,
that.
I got you.
That's the short answer, which we'll keep it at, since we do have another place to be here at some point. So, all right. So shirking. Shirking is the word economists use for slacking off. That's kind of our fancy word for employees generally slacking off. So you got an hourly rate for a consulting firm. Maybe it's an architectural firm. That's where I had a lot of time. Or an attorney would be another place, or just a consultant of some sort. So how could we overcome this shirking problem?
Will they come in and work in your office, or are they, like, if they're an independent consultant?
That might be an idea. So you could keep tabs on them, is what you're saying. Yeah, maybe you could somehow try to monitor their productivity. Short updates would be kind of similar. Sorry, Ryan. Short updates, like if they're doing if they've got a 4-week contract, I want updates every other day of your progress or something like that. Maybe built in, so that might help.
I think they just pay them salary.
Okay, pay them a salary instead of hourly. Okay. I think I understand what you mean, but you mean kind of a fixed rate, right? It's over the contract term,
Right.
not so much a.
Hourly.
But it functions the same. But it's basically, this deal's worth $4,000. Go for it. Yeah, and that changes the complexion of things completely, right? I had a textbook thing, which I don't know if I've lost this job or not, but I actually don't care if they don't come back. I did some work for an intermediate textbook that I'm using this term, this upcoming term, and they wanted me to do some additional work, which was kind of amounted to selecting questions or doing something or other. And they said $60 an hour pay. And I shot them an email back and I said, well, actually my hourly rate is much more than that, but I'm happy to do it for a fixed fee. So it changed my incentives. Like, even if they think, okay, this is only going to take a half hour or an hour for each chapter to do, or whatever I was doing, I would rather see, do you want to do this, take it or leave it, for $300 or $500 or whatever the amount was. But as soon as they flip it on an hourly, they don't know how efficient I am. I don't want the incentive to like milk the clock or anything. I'm kind of beyond that. I'd like to think I'm a person of integrity, but I don't want to sit there and watch the clock. I just want to know, and most of the time the way these things go is you end up putting more time than you think you're going to put in anyway. So I shot back the email to them and I said, hey, could you just shoot me a flat rate for the work? I haven't heard back from them, so they might have been ticked off that I didn't accept their hourly time, but I think I'll email them tomorrow. Okay, so yeah, those are some of the ways you might be able to tackle that problem. I ran into that, I guess before I get into this, with architects, they bill out at an hourly rate. It's pretty common, and so I did a lot of real estate development and work with architects. And sometimes if you come up with new design, like I tried to kind of push the envelope on a lot of things, it might be something that another architect already knows how to do, and so instead of spending 10 hours on it, they'd only spend 2, and they're charging $100 an hour, or if it's a person that's under or lower in the program, $60. But anywhere from $60 to $100 an hour is not uncommon for architectural rates. And so it's like, I don't want to pay your learning curve, right? We learned about learning curves. That's essentially what you're doing. They learn it, and then the next person that comes in. So we kind of played that tug of war. Same thing with attorneys. If we have a legal thing that we were kind of pushing the envelope on setting up these co-op deals that were new in Iowa to avoid paying property tax. So in Iowa, it's one of the few states where they tax commercial property and residential property at different rates, and it's significant, like 50% of the property tax bill. So on a $1 million apartment building, if the tax rate's 3% roughly, let's say, which about it is, that's $30,000 worth of tax. There was a kind of a weird carve out in the law that allowed you to designate the property a cooperative. Like you've heard in New York where you kind of buy your apartment, those are co-ops. And so we had no other reason to set it up in the state of Iowa besides the fact of getting the property, but it was considered a residential rate, and it was the law. The county and the city and the state couldn't fight you on it. Well, I shouldn't say that. There was risk involved because they could change the law and possibly you wouldn't get the benefits of it. So my partner and I were one of the first people in the state of Iowa to establish a co-op at an apartment building. And we kind of ran the risk because there was this was like the latest thing to possibly do. You know, we kind of found a loophole. Are they going to legislate and change that loophole? Because we had to spend about $5,000 in attorney's fees. The apartment building was not $1 million one. It was like $600,000 or something. And so it was going to take 2 years to recoup the attorney's fees in terms of property tax savings. And so we kind of ran this risk. Should we do it? Should we not? Glad we did. They still haven't changed the laws on it. And then everybody else was doing it, and then you get into the political realm more than.
Do you guys still own all those properties and run those properties there? Or
When I moved down here, I sold to my partner. I sold my shares to that. I still have some properties up there, yes. I got a few commercial properties left. Okay, so this was certainly true for me too, since we're bringing up borrowing money. The easier it is to get money, potentially the more riskier stuff you do because it's not your dough on the line. So we got to a point where myself, as well as every other American, had the opportunity, if they maybe had the right connections, the right establishment, I guess, the right things in place, could more or less 100% finance real estate purchases. So, you know, when that's the name of the game, whether it's 90% financing or 100%, you look at it a little differently. Those rates of return go up really high when you can use all of the bank's money, and therefore, as long as the economy stays good, you can service those properties. And so what happened is that real estate people around the nation were leveraged up to 80 to 90% in many cases, or there was plenty of debt out there like that. And then if the market falls 20%, 50% in cases, you know, depending on where you were, and tenants aren't there to pay their bills for you to pay your debt, then trouble starts. And so that's part of how the whole housing crisis and financial crisis worked. Banks were just as drunk on the good financing terms as the developers were. And so it seemed risk-free. They analyzed it. Oh yeah, well the market's always going up, and if the market goes up, then this loan should be good, right? And so you start making, on both sides of the transactions, maybe riskier types of loans than what would otherwise normally be done. Okay, so if the bank anticipates that, great. There are some banks that did that. I was reading a book on the financial crisis about BB&T, and they kind of, it's a bank I hadn't actually ever heard of, but it's one of the top 5 banks in the nation, like right up there with Wells Fargo, and they're huge down in the southeast, apparently. And when I traveled somewhere, Indiana, I saw BB&T branches. I'm like, oh, that's where they are. Okay. So, oh, we got a little music. So they kind of maintained their banking standards, which were pretty high, and kind of traditional banking standards of how much do we loan, how do we evaluate credit. Oh shoot, let me just get into a little bit of this because this is really interesting.
Are you talking about BBT?
BB&T is the bank that kind of held to their gun. You've heard of them? So they kind of held to their guns on, having high standards, let's say, or whatever. So the government stepped in an effort to help affordable housing and was guaranteeing loans. You guys are probably familiar with that, right? So I know you might not know the details, but Fannie and Freddie Mac are the two kind of quasi-government entities that have more or less taken over the whole mortgage system. And there's this weird mix of, you've heard of the FDIC insurance, right? So we were encouraging people to make deposits. The only way banks make money is on the spread. So if they give you 2%, they charge borrowers 5%, and they make 3% spread to pay their overhead and make money, right? That's how banks make a profit. And so when a bank would open up a new branch, they're potentially a risky bank, right? I mean, they're kind of aggressive, trying to get new loans. The general public doesn't give a rip because they're offering nice rates. The market rate's at 1%, but brand new shiny bank opens up, we're paying 1.5%. Why? Because they want to steal the customers away from existing banks. Just good old competition. Nothing wrong there other than rates are maybe artificially suppressed low because of the actions of the Federal Reserve. And we've got this FDIC insurance that gives incentive for consumers, savers, not to care where they place their money. So now back to the story. Now we've got people that are the risky banks taking people's money in, needing to make loans, but most of the existing customers, the solid borrowers, the ones that are good, were already at BB&T. And they were already at, let's say, Wells Fargo or whatever. And so how did that bank make loans? They had to, from an adverse selection standpoint, take who's ever left. Who's left? The guy that got turned down by BB&T because they're risky, right? So you bring it to that new bank, and they start making risky loans. Take that, multiply it by 1 million, and you've got kind of the financial crisis starting to balloon up into a big problem where you've got more risky loans, you've got the government sitting there ready to bail people out, which causes behavior to change. That's moral hazard, right? Because of the possibility of a bailout, whether you're on the consumer side, oh, the bank went under, saver, you still get your money back. The government's here to bail you out or bail them out, however you look at it, but you're covered. And so some of the banks got too big to fail, and so they got saved, and they end up taking riskier actions. That's all moral hazard type of issues.
So who's the moral hazard, the consumer or the bank?
Both. So the consumer, well, I take that back.
In the
On
in the view of the government.
yeah, they're still putting. Well, it could happen on the consumer side on borrowing possibly, but because you're right, it was a lack of incentive on the depositor, the saver, not to check out the credibility of the bank because the government was always going to bail them out. So they didn't have to be careful on where they put their money because the government was there to bail out that bank and they were safe. So what we would have rather had is imagine a customer who's shopping banks and saying, oh, well, BB&T is a solid bank or Wells Fargo is a solid bank. Maybe fly-by-night bank's not a good place to put my money. I might lose some. And then we could get into an insurance deal. Like, can you imagine if the bank goes under, you'll get 90% of your money back. people would not put a dime in there probably, right? They would start, that would be enough of an incentive to look for good banks that you think are credible, but instead it's 100%. And so that changes the incentives on the consumer side. On the bank side, their liability, so now you got your banker hat on, your liability is to your depositors. If they come to you, you need to give them their money back, right? So that's a liability for the bank. So for them, because the government was going to bail them out, the kind of heat was off, and it allowed them to look for riskier loans that had a higher rate of return. And so they're kind of on the risk-taking mode. The consumer's kind of safe due to the FDIC stuff, and it's just a recipe for disaster. And what's argued in this book is that a free market where people were, or more free market, not to say, get rid of FDIC insurance completely, but there's other things that could be changed, maybe within the system to align the incentives again a little bit better. Like we can make improvements to the current system, and it really comes back to good old-fashioned stuff that you tell your kids of you got to be accountable for your actions. If you screw up, you lose money. We don't bail you out, right? So if the government gets out of that bailout mentality, that would be one step in the right direction in allowing some of those companies to fail.
You know what the Fed wanted to do though? Because they were afraid of moral hazard, right? Because they didn't want the banks to think we'll just bail you out and we're going to get control. So for a while they tried to stay out of it, and they finally were like, have to really know.
Yeah, it was always whether it's a credible statement or not.
Okay.
So once they bailed out AIG, then they kind of showed their cards that, hey, we're here, we're going to, and that's what they had to do at the time. Now, granted, maybe you can't go and undo the previous bad things that you did overnight. Like maybe that's what you had to do given the circumstances. But long term, what do we do? How do we get out of this bailout mentality that I think is really hurting the United States? Okay, anything else come to mind or comments? All right, so this is a lot of what I just said. Give that a quick read. So, how do bailouts end up hurting responsible borrowers? We didn't really talk about that in the grand scheme of things.
Just makes it more difficult to get a loan.
Okay,
There's maybe more stipulations. than
definitely,
there were
that's a good
before
one.
2008.
A lot harder to get a loan now, even if you, and I saw it happen as I was kind of exiting the real estate industry. I mean, people who were solid with credit score and you name it, they had to jump through 45 hoops more than what they did prior to it. So that's one way. Good.
Well, no, you do get it, your rate's not gonna be.
Rates, right? So if the rate, and this is probably true with credit card rates especially, right? Or an easy way to kind of flip. It's true in the housing as well, but all the people who are walking away from their debt gets passed along in the form of higher interest to the responsible borrowers. So what would have been maybe 6% puts upward pressure on that interest rate. So you end up paying for it that way.
I feel like, I don't know for sure, but I think like the down payment type has gone up a little bit, like they're asking for more percentage on down payment.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. I mean, in general, that's a good thing. From maybe a couple different standpoints. So the new thing that was kicked around, just around the crisis time was having skin in the game. So they would look at deals, and I was kind of accustomed to not having much of my own skin in the game, right, of a down payment. So beefing that up to address these moral hazard and adverse selection issues associated with that. If all of a sudden you've got to come up with $3,000 and not just walk in, you're going to have a better pool of people that have that $3,000. And people are going to want to protect through the endowment effect that we've seen in behavioral economics with biases. If they actually put $3,000 down, they're going to act differently. They're going to try to protect that $3,000 rather than if they have nothing into it.
It's almost like an investment.
Yeah.
investment inside of investment.
Yep, it is. Yeah, and they're at risk of losing that.
Do you see a personal or an individual bailout the same thing as a bankruptcy? Would bankruptcy also be a bailout? Individual bankruptcy.
Yeah, yes and no. Bankruptcy is kind of a loaded thing. And I think the bankruptcy laws are actually pretty well defined and actually work pretty well for the United States. From a consumer side, if you just mess up your finances and declare bankruptcy, your credit's shot for a while, right? No more borrowing. And we're so active with credit scores and stuff, so you're screwed for about 10 years, I think, 7 to 10 years, depending on it. With the financial crisis, that's kind of waning off a little bit of them making exceptions. But your credit score is screwed, and you cannot declare bankruptcy again for, I can't remember what that rule is, 7 to 10 years? It's a pretty big window. So once you declare bankruptcy, you got a clean slate, then you better stay clean. So there's kind of good incentives there. Screw up once, you were bailed out, so to speak. But if you're going to continue to mess up your life, you're going to pay the penalty, and we're not going to bail you out again. So that's kind of a healthy law on the consumer side. On the business investment side, I think it's healthy for people to know that they can fall back on bankruptcy if they take a chance. So when you get involved with business, you might find yourself exposed to huge liabilities way beyond anything you could ever generate on your own in terms of income. So you start up a small business, it seems good at first, and then you make mistakes A, B, C, and D all the way through Z, and somebody trips and falls, you get sued for $1 million. Boom, you got $1 million lawsuit. You were only making $30,000 at the pizza stand per year. It was just a small family business. How the heck are you going to pay for $1 million thing? You got bankruptcy to fall back on, right? You just declare. Now, when you declare that bankruptcy, which is a personal bankruptcy, by the way, similar in nature to the consumer who screwed up, going to go through the same process. It's going to wipe off that $1 million debt, but now you did something that you probably wouldn't have done if you were really cognizant of what you were getting into, that you were actually exposed to a potential $1 million loss. Would you ever start that business? A lot of people wouldn't. Some people still would. There's the risky people out there that would still go for it, but other people may not go for it. So I think it induces us on the business side to maybe take some risks that are good risks. You know, I'm not talking about the crazy person who's basically going to Vegas and gambling. I'm talking about a person who has a business, a solid business plan. There's 90% chance of this thing being very profitable for the rest of their life. There's a 10% chance some idiot's going to get hurt and sue me for $1 million, right? So it's likely that the business will be good. It was a good bet when you started the business. But as we've learned through this material, unfortunate, unforeseen, uncertain things happen. And the bankruptcy system allows an outlet for that so that we encourage entrepreneurship and new business startups.
But first of all, I think credit is overrated, but
I agree. On the consumer side, and even on the business side.
well, on the consumer side, I think it is, but
For sure.
When you just said, I forgot how you just said it, making a bet that your business will be good. That bet is based on your credit.
No, not really. I mean, or what do you mean by that?
Well, the bet. Okay, so the bank is making a choice to give you a loan
Yeah.
based on your credit.
So there's two people in the party,
Yeah.
which is actually good because the bank does have financial people called underwriters that look at your business plan and say, you know, I know they didn't get an MBA out of a university like some fancy folks, but, you know, this makes sense. So my point is they had a second set of eyes that had a vested interest in them succeeding, other than the other little issues of government distorting maybe some of the incentives that those banks have. But it is kind of good in that respect. But on the consumer side, I'm totally with you. I teach, I'm starting personal finance, and I teach the Dave Ramsey system, zero debt. Live your consumer life with zero debt. including your house down the road is kind of the big plan. But don't go into consumer debt. Don't get the deal at Best Buy. Don't get a loan for your car. Don't, no debt, no debt, no
Student
debt.
loans.
Education, even in student loans, potentially. Now, there's circumstances that, that's the one area where I'd say it's a close one, yes. So that student loan debt, house debt, are you really making an investment in an asset that is going to have some return? That's kind of the key. So if you've got the degree and you're not able to pool funds, too many times people take the easy way out, though, is the problem with even education. They immediately think, oh, I have to get a student loan. Everybody gets a student loan. I don't have to cut back on my going out to eat 5 times a week, and I can still drive my $10,000 car with a $400 a month payment. But I just got to have these loans. I mean, the university charges so much money. How can I afford it? Oh my gosh, everybody needs an education. You're infringing on my rights for an education if I don't get a loan for education. So that's kind of the idea, is that squeeze out every other dollar from the consumer side. Don't have that car. Don't go out to eat as much. Don't, make choices on the personal budgeting side so that you can keep that student loan as low as possible. I'm sure all of you guys have optimized that out. I don't need to kind of preach into the choir, but because then you start. One of the classic things I think is people substituting debt around. So they want to better their situation, so and you guys might have done this. I did this. This is stuff I've learned through life. Get a student loan because the interest rates are cheap and pay off the car, and now I'm debt-free with the car. The problem with that is most people then, because they're debt-minded, go out and buy another car after they haven't had one for a little while, right? So they use the loan to pay off the car, but then they're like, well, I could use a nice new car. Oh, it smells so good with the interiors and everything, so I deserve that car. I have to commute from Lawrence every day. All those personal justifications that a change of mindset is really healthy. One of the things that's neat about the program is I think it clearly shows to students that there's nobody that should not be a millionaire at the time they graduate from Ottawa University. I mean, I'm that convinced of it. A millionaire. $1 million bottom line net worth. You just have to give up a few lattes and a few pizzas. It's amazing when you start looking at making different decisions early in your life, not choosing the latest, greatest TV and change those into dumping into a retirement plan, stay debt-free. You can be a millionaire by the time you're 55, 60. It's not even that hard. It's really not that hard, believe it or not. You can do it, or they can do it. It's kind of the thing that we spend a whole semester going through, building that up and going through the workbooks. So I'm a big fan of Dave Ramsey. If you've heard of it, I've also taught at our church the 9-week program. So if you're interested at all, I don't mean to be doing a special plug, but it's good stuff. Good stuff. Ryan, what?
I was going to say, I know a lot of people back home that take out a loan to buy a car. Because the interest rate on the loan is lower than the...
Yep. And that's covered in the material of kind of what's wrong with that thinking. I did it. That's exactly the way I thought the whole time. So I don't want to get too sidetracked. We can talk more about that later at our other venue, because I just love that stuff. It's such powerful stuff. Remind me to talk to you about how you start a debt snowball and become debt-free. It's exactly the opposite of the mentality you were just talking about with kind of worrying about interest rates. That's pretty cool.
I just remember what Warren Buffett would always say.
Yeah, Buffett's a good proponent of not doing that type of stuff.
Use other people's money. You can get an interest rate at 29% for a car for 5 years. Why wouldn't you?
Wrong. Buffett would not argue that. Let's talk about that more later. So, if you would have went down the line of use that to start a business or something, or invest in something other than a consumption item. So, we'll talk more. That's a fun topic. Good with maybe a beverage choice in front of you. All right, so last thing we're going to talk about is the principal-agent problem. Principal-agent problem. So, this is kind of the last of the frontier. It kind of deals with adverse selection and moral hazard as well. Is the person I hired acting in my best interest? Right? Does that always happen? That you hire somebody and, yep, they're looking out for me, no problem. What do you think? Has that been your experience?
No.
Anybody that you hired? No. Any specific examples rub you bad, Jesse?
I just had a person on my team that would just leave, go out to her car and take a nap when she's supposed to be working claims.
Okay. Yep. That sounds good. So the principal in this case might be the company, or if you were their superior or whatever, but you might have observed some shirking,
Yes.
right, that wasn't helping out the bottom line. All right, so one of the mantras that Frobe has kind of continued to go through from started in chapter 1, and now we're going to kind of circle back to that here at the end is, why do we get people making bonehead decisions or bonehead outcomes if there's a problem in general? So what are the things we need to have in place? And so if we can find opportunities to make sure that people have good information and their incentives are aligned, we should end up getting good outcomes or better outcomes, right? So do we have the right person in place? You know, who was the decision maker? So his thought is to look at those 3 questions anytime you confront a problem. So some issue blew up in your face and you're like, okay, who was the decision maker? You know, why ultimately did this happen? Kind of think about the chain of events. So who was it? Did that person have enough information to make a sound decision? Because we talked about asymmetric information where maybe it's possible they just didn't know, right? They made a stupid decision, but they didn't know any better. So did the person have sufficient information to make a better decision? And then finally, did they have the proper incentives to make the right decision? Those 3 things kind of help guide us on working through problems. And so the more that you can think about that as you get involved with an organization, maybe after you graduate, and maybe you'll start getting into some policy changes or the way the institution is run. I know I'm thinking a lot about that lately here at Ottawa, since I had kind of a big frustration this afternoon come up, and I just kind of sent an email out and said, this system's broken, you know, and you can use this logic to kind of isolate the problem. Otherwise, you can just sit there and talk and spin your tires, right? Oh, well, she said this, or he said this, and this is why this happened, and why did they do that? And you can sit here and have that. But if you really want to kind of diagnose the issues, take those 3 questions and kind of work through them. All right, so in a general institutional setup, to maybe fix a problem, you can think about moving a direction, more towards centralization or more towards decentralization. Do we need to push the decision making up a level? So in a traditional business standpoint, we might have the hierarchy that you guys have seen in other classes with the president up here, and then we've got some VPs down below, right? And we start to do our little chain. Middle managers and then the employees. And so where did the issue happen? Did it happen on the front lines, or did it happen in middle management? Did it happen at the VP level? You know, what do we need to do? Should we move more towards centralization, kind of moving up the hierarchy? In theory, we could have the president making every single decision in the business. Not very efficient, but works if you have a very small business. If you're a small business and you've got 2 employees, you can have a very centralized system. You might choose to decentralize some things, but from a monitoring standpoint, it's easier to check out what those employees are doing. As an organization gets bigger, inevitably there has to be some decentralization, usually. So that's the concept of where are the decisions being made, Do we decentralize and push decisions down, or do we move them up? So the university is kind of currently working through that. When President Eichner took the helm 5+ years ago, the school was kind of in a mess. There's a lot of problems. $5 million worth of losses, and kind of a dysfunctional setup where we rotated through presidents the previous 4 years. President Eichner had served on the board of trustees, so he kind of kept tabs with the university. He's an OU grad, I don't know if all of you know that. And so he had kind of a vested interest in it. And so he had a big mess down here where there's probably been a lot of decentralization over time, where Arizona, Wisconsin, Indiana, Overland Park have kind of made decisions on their own. And we ended up having some outcomes that weren't very desirable at the lower end. And so he kind of moved towards centralizing some of that decision making, kind of moved it up the chain. He stayed very active, kind of calling the shots to try to reorganize the university. And I think now he's at a point, he's commented that maybe it's time to start pushing things down a little bit now that we have some of the structures. So it's not really a one-shot answer of, well, I believe in socialism. I'm a communist, so I want this one. No, I'm a free market entrepreneur. I'm going to decentralize. It's not really what we're talking about here. It's more of on maybe a case-by-case or a department basis. How do we solve the problem at hand? Do we think about moving it up or down? Do we centralize that decision more, or maybe move to decentralize it? Obviously, if the vice president is the one making some dumb decisions because they don't really know what's going on up in Wisconsin and they're calling the shots from their offices here in Ottawa, then we start to push some decisions down into the sites more. But then you run the risk of maybe things not being communicated, and we have different groups doing different things, and we're all supposed to be Ottawa University, and if you get an Ottawa University degree, that means you had a certain experience as a student that we'd like to keep consistent. Okay, comments or questions there? You've probably experienced that one, I'm guessing, at places you've worked, right? Where either you can certainly step into a place and they're going to have a certain way that they do things, and then when problems arise, how does it change? Do we move up or down? Okay, a little example about the art business here. So ASI is an auction service that deals in fine art. This is based on a true story. And so they hired these gallery artists to kind of negotiate with the people who own the art. And part of what they were negotiating was the price and the commission that was paid to the company. I'll give you a chance to read that. Anybody got any questions on the setup? Do you understand the different parts? Please speak up if you don't. So you've got a piece of art. The person says, "Hey, I want to get this auction." Well, we handle that. We're good. We'll charge you 30%. We'll charge you 10%. In other words, that was an important variable for the company. You know, which one did they pick? If the owner, if this started off as a small business, how do you think that negotiation went down? What did the owner do so that we avoid the principal agent problem, trying to take the agent out of the picture?
Probably follow the market, what the competition's doing.
Good. So yeah, know what's happening in the market. But what about whether you charge 10 or 30 for a particular client?
Based on
How much they're going to go for. Good, right? So that was a market thing. We talked about consumer surplus. We talked about price discrimination, right? You enter in a talk with somebody, and we start that Nash bargaining thing, right? Well, I could go down to the art dealer down the street and do this, or I might just keep this piece because my grandma gave it to me and I really like it. So, but I'd sell it at the right price, you know. That's all the Nash bargaining stuff with negotiating. So here, the owner saw that commissions were generally in this range and averaged up to be 17 or so is kind of the story that's being told, was his historical experience. And lately, they've just been coming in at that rock bottom, at the 10%. Okay, what are the possible solutions for this problem?
Fire the experts.
Fire the experts? Okay. What else?
Just pick a flat 15%.
Okay, so he could just
No
dictate,
negotiation.
take away the negotiating power. Risk of that? What would be the risk of that?
Some of the higher
Make more
quality
money.
products will go to competitors.
Okay, yeah, could be going to competitors. What are you leaving on the table? This is really what I want you to think about. Kind of like what I did with that exercise earlier on thinking about if I charge a flat 15, what am I missing out on? What lost opportunities?
If you sell something high, then if you sell something high, then you're like charging flat 15, you're making money on the table.
Okay, so you could have maybe gotten something from higher. Had you could have got 20 instead of charging 15. That's one thing on the table. What else? What about the other direction? That's always the tougher one, is the other direction. So if you come out and say 15%,
You have,
who else are you missing out on?
the
The 10% people, right? Somebody who would have been willing to play ball with you if you would have came down to 10%, we don't get their business. So that was the advantage of price discrimination, is that we increase the volume of business by charging different prices to different people. So here was the commissions. And so by locking it down to 15%, we are missing out on some potential opportunities. But then they need to think, well, is that better than losing out on all of them, or, you know, because of the circumstances?
Could, instead of the art owner giving the kickback, if you get it to 30%, then you give your employee
Yeah.
a little bit of the kickback.
A little bit more of the kickback, good, right? So if you score a 30% commission, I'm going to give you a higher cut. And so we start getting them thinking about giving them an incentive to get the higher cut.
Now, if you want to cut their flat salary a little bit, put those incentives in.
Possibly, yeah. You might want to shift the compensation scheme around. Yep. All right, so let's tackle it in the context of what Frobe was suggesting. So, who's the decision maker?
The experts.
The experts, good. The experts who are hired are the ones active on the front lines negotiating the commission. Okay. So, do they have enough information?
They're an expert on that.
If they're an expert, they have the information, right? And they're talking one-on-one with the customer. So as far as learning as much as they can, and in terms of a Nash bargaining standpoint, you know, they're probably in the good position to do that. So they had enough information. Did they have incentives to make the right decision? No. There's your problem, right? So we're back to setting up these schemes. So that's kind of the process that's helpful to try to pinpoint problems. Whether it's an informational problem, then you might handle it differently, right? Oh, well, the expert didn't know about this and this, and if I just give them some information or access to somebody, then that would be a different way of tackling the problem. Okay. Mickey D's. You guys are familiar with that company. Is anybody familiar with the franchise business? Has anybody been involved with one by chance, or? So I did, for better, for worse, mostly for worse, but a little bit for better. Only one time. I was the first, I and my partners, I didn't do this by myself, but one of our developments, we were the first franchisee of a sports bar and grill place. The owner had 5 other restaurants that he owned all himself. But he was talking about getting the franchise business, and we liked him, and he liked us, and we liked the product, and so we did it. And actually, the relationship turned out really good because we had a good relationship with each other. At different points, things didn't perform as well, and so we had to try to figure out how do we do this franchise fee. And of course, I'm the economist, so I'm trying to figure out to make it kind of incentive compatible, but it's difficult. It's difficult. So a lot of franchise fees are set up on total revenue. So if you do $1 million worth of business, there might be a franchise fee of 5%. And so you owe based off of your total sales. So maybe you see the problem with that already. What would that be if we have it based off of sales? So we're interested in profits as a business. And how do I calculate profits? Here's the big price times quantity, total revenue, right? And is that profit?
Minus TC.
Minus the total cost. Good. So minus total cost. We wrote it a few different ways. This would be another version that we did. So the average cost per unit, the price per unit. So we can look at it that way, or just total revenue minus total cost. And so here we've got a 5% franchise fee based off of total revenue. Does that guarantee that you're going to have that? No. So if you had total cost of $1.1 million, you've got a $100,000 loss, and you still owed the franchisor some money on the books. Did they do everything they were intending to do? Did they advertise like they said they were? What did we get out of the deal? That's a whole question. That's all for negotiations. So you kind of work through a fairly complex legal document on franchising. And it's not for everybody. I've probably talked to at least as many disgruntled franchise owners as I have happy franchise owners, and maybe even a little more on the disgruntled side, because you have this incentive conflict going on, the principal agent problem. So, what other issues do we have on both sides of the equation? Talked about some things here. Let's talk about McDonald's corporate, maybe, or go ahead, Justin,
Well, I
whatever.
was just gonna say, like, it kind of says up there, they want the high standards, but if you're not a franchisee, then you're not necessarily gonna be up to the same standards potentially.
So what does standards mean in terms of this equation? Cost. High standards means if the burger looks a little green, you throw it out. Now, hopefully the company throws it out anyway, but you get where I'm going with that, right? High quality, freshness, something that is not fresh that day for the buns for the burgers, then you toss it. Well, that seems kind of dumb. These are still pretty good. I don't know. We should use them, right? So that standards costs money, and so the franchisor wants to keep standards high, but they can be on flip side of the fence. After you get into the contract, the franchisor, the owner, the big corporate, let's call them corporate so we don't get too confused, but the franchisor, once you've agreed to the setup, doesn't have really any incentive to spend the money on advertising or enhancing the brand, other than, and that's not totally true, other than if this is based off of a percentage of the sales. In theory, it adds more sales, but the incentives don't align up perfectly. And so that might be an issue moving forward if they haven't obligated a certain amount of expenditures that go along with you guaranteeing to pay off of the revenues. So it gets a little slippery. Do you guys know some small business owners that work themselves into the ground? There's usually quite a few of them if you ask around. So to be a manager of a McDonald's is different than being the owner of that McDonald's. You might be doing the same type of activities, of management, but your behavior is a little different when you've got your own dough on the line, and you get all the upward benefit in terms of if there is profit, you get 100% of it. So that's where incentives matter in terms of how we set up the company. So instead of a flat fee, we move towards some sort of percentage deal that maybe can better align incentives. Boy, when we were looking at this, we didn't agree to this. One thing that came up was, well, what if we sell $2 million? Our potential restaurant had potential to get up to 2. I think the highest we ever got up was 1.8. But what if we get up to 2? You're going to get 5% of that, off what we did. It was through our efforts. So we ended up putting a cap on that. So it was 5% up to a cap, and it was kind of the scale that we worked with. So again, designing the program so that incentives match up. So how about this question here? Why does McDonald's use company-owned stores along freeways but franchises in towns? So true story. Along the freeway, you guys might not know that, but they tend to use company-owned ones along freeways, but and I don't know about this one in Ottawa. It's kind of off the freeway, but that might be an example of it.
Does it have to do with their customers? I mean, if you're traveling, you're just going to stop at McDonald's because you know it's McDonald's, and your experience could be a little different than another one. But if you stop at the one in town, like if you live there, I want it to be this way, and I want it to be the same way every time.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing, right? The transient customer is a little different than maybe the neighborhood customer. So if we have the setup so that the owner is the in-town people, they have a vested interest long-term in making sure that client keeps coming back every week, every 2 weeks. On the freeway, no matter how well you treat them, odds are good that that person's never stepping into your store again. And so we don't have the same issues because of the transient nature of the consumer. I had the luxury of that concept a little bit with college student housing. So property management's a tough business. I don't know how familiar you are with it, but you really are never going to please everybody all of the time. It's just impossible with property management. And so in town, I'd like to think we had a pretty good name as a landlord. I wouldn't say it was the most sparkling, but there was other landlords that would seem to be around, and they were just, not very nice landlords, and they just didn't have a good reputation. And you kind of wondered, like, why hasn't that market system, weeded this person out? Why are they still there in business? Why aren't the good landlords ultimately surviving in the long run? And part of it came down to the transient nature of the consumer, in my opinion. Right? So you've got the college student who's there, and they graduate, and they're gone. And then the next freshman comes in. And so the transfer of knowledge of the bad landlord from the tenant who experienced the bad landlord to the new tenant coming in kind of gets lost in the movement. And so you're always churning that over. Whereas if in a town like Ottawa, if you're a bad landlord, since the university doesn't dominate here like it does in Ames, the population. In Ames, we had a population of, it creeped up to 60. The student population was 30,000, if that gives you an idea. So 50% of every human being walking around was a student, either graduate student or undergrad. A lot different than what we have in Ottawa. So those long-term effects get passed around by the neighborhood, and that landlord usually would get driven out of business or have a tough go of it, not fill up their apartments or whatever. Okay, questions or comments there? All right, I think this is getting close to our last one here. So Dollar General, everybody familiar with Dollar General? Okay, this is how they ran their business. So, everybody familiar with or they got the details down. So we got basically an agent being hired, or even a salesperson, a commissioned person of some sort. That's the setup. Open 50 stores, you get a generous bonus. So, who's the decision maker? The agent, right, is kind of coming in on the front end. The agent's the decision maker. Does the agent have enough information to make a good decision? Yeah. Does the agent have incentives to make a good decision? No. So incentives are failing us again. What could we do to improve it?
Lock down the decision to not open the door unless
Okay.
sales potential's correct. 'Cause it sounds like they're just opening the store
Right.
for the fun of it.
So have a double check
Yeah.
of some sort. Like, and so that would be decentralizing or centralizing decisions. That solution, your proposed solution to the problem.
Well, if it's coming down to the agents to open a store, which seems weird, it'd probably be centralizing
Yep.
it up.
You're moving towards centralization. That solution moves towards centralizing,
Yeah.
moving it up the chain a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, good. What else, Scott?
Could you just add in, since they're supposed to make at least $1 million a year, can you add in open 15 stores that make $1 million?
Yeah. Add some more language to the contract. And there might be maybe a sliding scale that your bonus is tied to the performance. Maybe it doesn't have to be $1 million, but it better be something. And then maybe even more than $1 million could be a little bit bigger. So change that compensation plan to align the incentives. Any other things come to mind? By the way, on that last art dealer story, I forgot to tell you, the guy did what you said, Skylar, well, you and Jesse, on he fired all the dealers. Well, actually, I don't think I can't remember, I got the details here, but he either fired them or he changed the compensation to 17%, and the experts all quit. And they went. So it's probably pressure maybe to quit, or quasi-firing or whatever. And he went on to lose $7.5 million or something by making that change, because all of his experts were gone. Imagine, all the people that have details about your business and about art, your company's gone. So you got some transition. So that decision might have been questionable. But the most questionable thing that he did was he did a little conspiring with the other large firm in town, and so that 17% came from an agreement between the other company, and he ended up getting busted on that. That's price fixing. That's covered by the antitrust laws, where we're trying to keep competition. You can't fix prices like that with your competitors, and so he spent jail time on top of losing the money. So that was kind of an interesting story. So think about those incentives and how to make them good. All right. So